We've probably seen 1,000 characters on Dexter, and at least half of them just came and left as if nothing had happened. I mean, think about it. What happened to Tony Ferrer? Or the Castillos? Do you even remember them? At least you won't forget Santos Jimenez, the man who killed Dexter's mother. But he's still a character that just magically disappeared. So let's see which Dexter characters suddenly went missing. Before the show even had a title sequence, Dexter Morgan was already leaving bodies behind. These are the kills that happened in the shadows of flashbacks and webisodes before Miami Metro ever gave him a badge and a desk. Nurse Mary is where it all begins on screen. She was an angel of death, a hospital worker who convinced herself she was doing her patients a mercy by poisoning them before their time. Now, the fact that she was delusional enough to believe that made her pretty dangerous. She didn't think she was doing anything wrong. She targeted Harry Morgan himself, slipping him overdoses under the guise of care. Dexter figured it out before the doctors did. Still relatively new to all of this, he infiltrated the hospital ward where she operated, found her alone, and of course, did what he always does. For a first kill, you'll expect him to go all haywire and panic and all, but don't forget, this is the same kid who watched his mother get butchered. Anyway, that was the end of Nurse Mary. Juan Renes came shortly after. He was a brutal pimp who beat a prostitute to death and murdered a cop on top of it. But Dexter had plans for him. He tracked him down, and rather than just kill him, he dismembered the body. As messy as it was, this was the beginning of Dexter's butcher side. It all started with Juan Renes. Then there's Robert Milson, a university professor who had been quietly killing his own students, 7 of them, while maintaining his academic reputation without so much as a raised eyebrow from the people around him. I mean, 7 students. His protege, Peter Thornton, had picked up the habit, making them a matching set of killers. But Dexter always has his ways. He stabbed Milson in the heart and ran a saw right through Thornton. Alex Timmons was a sniper, not the military kind with a purpose, the kind that climbed to rooftops and picked off strangers because it gave him something to feel. This was actually the first time Dexter went the textbook way. Observe, confirm, strike. Timmons became the first entry in Dexter's bloodslide collection. Gene Marshall was a wealthy real estate mogul who burned down one of his own apartment complexes, killing 7 people. It was as monstrous as it sounds. Dexter slit his throat and crushed his skull under a car. Oh, and do you remember the Lindquist father and son, Max and Coleman? They were a matching pair who killed prostitutes and their clients, a family operation of the worst possible kind. P.S. Dexter decapitated them together. The prequel series. Dexter. Original Sin filled in a chapter of Dexter's history that the original show never touched, the time when he was still interning, still figuring out the rules, and still calibrating exactly how far Harry's code would stretch before it snapped. And the targets he chose during this period, Tony Ferrer, was a loan shark, which sounds almost mundane until you understand what his version of loan sharking actually looked like. He didn't just collect debts, he murdered debtors who couldn't pay, and when one of his victims left behind a son, that son took his own life. Ferrer was responsible for both deaths, but this never bothered him. Dexter was still building his police portfolio at the time, which meant he couldn't afford anything that would trace back to his internship or his growing ties to Miami Metro. His solution to Tony was simple: a machete to the neck and a body dumped deep in the swamp, far enough from everything. Of course, Tony still went to the slide collection. Levi Reed operated on pure appetite. He was a home invader who broke into family homes, not for money, but for the act itself, killing entire families because it gave him a thrill he couldn't seem to find anywhere else. Harry had been carrying a private guilt about Reed, but Dexter relieved him of that guilt. He tracked Reed down, stabbed him, and dismembered the remains as usual. The kill also protected Harry from the temptation of taking matters into his own hands and potentially destroying everything he and Dexter were quietly building together. But Harry was still upset. These original Sin kills also dropped something that would define Dexter's whole story: his ability to operate right next to the people investigating the same crimes he had committed. Nearly every case here involved the police, either directly or indirectly. Yet Dexter did his thing without any fuss. Talk about an internship as a serial killer. Season 1 was the first time we really saw what Dexter was. The research, the kill room, the blood slide. This was where we first saw Harry's code. Mike Donovan was the first kill, a choir director who had built his entire public identity around working with children and was using that access to rape and murder young boys. After a choir performance, Dexter was already waiting in the backseat of Donovan's car. And in the kill room, he forced Donovan to look at the exhumed bodies of 3 murdered boys. That was Dexter adding his own flair to Harry's code, but to be clear, Harry had been building that code since Dexter was a child. This was just the first time we saw it in action on screen. Jamie Jaworski was a valet who stabbed a woman to death and posted the footage on his S&M website. The discovery of that video is what put him on Dexter's radar. Jaworski had the kind of confidence that comes from years of getting away with something. He had no reason to believe anyone was closing in on him. But he also ended up under Dexter's knife. Matt Chambers was a drunk driver who had caused multiple deaths and was still walking around Miami without a scratch. Dexter posed as a fellow drunk to get close to him, a small performance that required him to mirror someone he genuinely despised. When the moment came, Chambers was still denying everything right up until Dexter stabbed him in the chest. And yes, Dexter hates lies. How ironic. The Castillos, Jorge, and Valerie were human smugglers who drowned the immigrants they smuggled when they couldn't pay the full fee. They used a boat for the drownings, but Dexter tracked them down to Jorge's auto salvage yard, and that's where it ended for both of them, in an Airstream trailer surrounded by scrap metal. Poetic, really. You remember Emmett Meridian, the psychiatrist who manipulated women into taking their own lives? Funny how he was briefly Dexter's therapist before he was killed too. Seasons 2 and 3 pushed Dexter into territory the first season hadn't fully explored. What happens when the code gets complicated by personal history, emotions, and the rare case of someone who genuinely can't be controlled. Little Chino was a gang enforcer with a machete and a professional specialty in eliminating witnesses before they could testify. He was physically imposing in a way that most of Dexter's targets weren't, and the first time their paths crossed, Chino got away. He actually broke free from a kill room. Now, that almost never happened. Even if he got him on the second attack, it taught Dexter one thing: you can always circle back. Gabriel Bosque showed up in season 2 as Deborah's post-trauma boyfriend. After everything she'd been through with the ICE truck killer, she needed someone steady, and Gabriel seemed to fit that on paper. He even had a book called The Ice Princess, which, given what Deborah had just survived, was either a spectacular coincidence or the universe's idea of a joke. Their relationship had the usual sitcom-adjacent awkwardness, accidental handcuffing, misunderstandings, the kind of early relationship chaos that the show used to remind you that Deborah's personal life was always running at a slight disaster frequency. But Deborah started developing feelings for Frank Lundy, the FBI agent who had come in to lead the Bay Harbor butcher investigation, and that was effectively the end of Gabriel. He didn't get a dramatic breakup scene, he didn't get a confrontation or a meaningful farewell, he just stopped appearing, and the show moved forward like he'd never existed. Dexter, for his part, barely registered Gabriel as a presence. Why would he? Gabriel wasn't a threat at all. Right after this was Santos Jimenez. He was different from almost anyone Dexter ever put on his table because this one wasn't about the code at all. Not really. Jimenez was one of the men directly responsible for the chainsaw massacre that killed Dexter's mother. Since it was very personal, Dexter used a different kill room. Anton Briggs had a slightly longer run and a marginally more dramatic exit. He was Quinn's informant first, a musician who had information on Freebo, the drug dealer Dexter had already put on his list. Anton fed the police intel and then somehow ended up in Deborah's orbit romantically, which made his position considerably more complicated. When the Skinner, George King, the man flaying victims alive across Miami, got hold of Anton and tortured him, it briefly looked like the show was building towards something real with this character. He survived that ordeal, which is actually rarer than you'd think for people in Deborah's life. They moved in together. It seemed like things were heading somewhere. But Deborah confessed that she had slept with Lundy while they were together, and Anton walked out, and that was the last anyone saw of him. No follow-up. Apparently the show had gotten what it needed from him. Can't believe Lundy really broke two proper relationships without even having a proper love story with Deborah. If there is a turning point in Dexter's story, it runs through seasons 4 and 5. The kills in this period were totally unhinged. Season 5 introduced the Barrel Girl Gang, a network of men who had been abducting, assaulting, and murdering women together for years. Boyd Fowler, a roadkill collector who served as the group's entry point, was stabbed in the heart by Dexter during a kill that also introduced Lumen Pierce, a survivor who had witnessed the whole thing. Cole Harmon, the group's head of security, was stabbed in the chest. Alex Tilden, a respectable businessman by day and one of the group's participants by night, was stabbed by Lumen herself. Dan Mendel, a dentist, yes, a dentist, was killed after Dexter broke his neck. And the ringleader, Jordan Chase, real name Eugene Greer, a famous motivational speaker who had orchestrated everything from the beginning, finally got what was coming to him too. Each of these men had spent years believing their carefully maintained reputations made them untouchable. Dexter and Lumen dismantled that belief one by one. The season 5 kills also introduced the only real partnership Dexter ever had in the kill room. Lumen wasn't his usual solo operation. She was present, involved, and emotionally invested in a way that added a layer of complexity to every target they took down together. For a brief stretch, Dexter wasn't just hunting. He was trying to help someone survive what had been done to them. It didn't last. Lumen eventually found a way through and left. But while it did, these kills felt different from anything else in the series. By the time season 6 arrived, Dexter had been operating for long enough that the kills had developed a kind of grim rhythm. And yet season 6 managed to introduce one-time characters that tested Dexter. Walter Kenny, the Tooth Fairy, was a retired serial killer who had gone dormant for decades before Dexter crossed paths with him. He'd spent years living quietly in a retirement community, his crimes buried deep enough that most people had forgotten the case. Dexter hadn't. He suffocated Kenny, which was a notably quieter end than most, appropriate in a strange way for a man whose crimes had gone cold. Even in his 70s, nobody gets to just retire from Dexter's list. Viktor Baskov from season 7 was a high-ranking member of the Ukrainian Koshka Brotherhood with a body count and serious pull in the organization. He had murdered a police officer, which put him squarely on Dexter's radar. Dexter killed him with a fire extinguisher at an airport, improvised, quick, and efficient. Ray Speltzer was a different story. He was a maze killer who built elaborate indoor mazes inside buildings, strobe lights, mannequins, heavy metal, while wearing a bull-horned helmet like some kind of real-life minotaur. Dexter pursued him, impaled him with a broken shovel handle, and burned the evidence. Lewis Green is the most interesting of this group because his exit wasn't quiet at all. He was a tech genius working as an intern for Miami Metro, and he became obsessed with Dexter's approval in a way that crossed from admiration into something way more unsettling. He had developed a video game built around real serial killers, and he wanted Dexter, of all people, to validate it. I mean, that's a weird coincidence, right? When Dexter dismissed the game, Lewis didn't take it well. He started sabotaging Dexter's life in petty but escalating ways, mailing him an ice truck, killer prosthetic hand, canceling his credit cards, trying to insert himself into the investigation in ways that could have caused real problems. He also got fired from Miami Metro after Masuka discovered he'd been hoarding evidence. The show spent a surprising amount of time establishing Lewis as a potential long-game antagonist, someone who might eventually piece together enough information to genuinely threaten Dexter's cover. And then Isaac Serko, a Ukrainian mob boss in town for completely separate reasons, shot Lewis dead on Dexter's boat. Dexter. New Blood took everything the original series had built and transplanted it into the gray winter silence of Iron Lake, New York. Dexter had been living as Jim Lindsay for 10 years, no kills, no kill room, no blood slides. The Dark Passenger had apparently gone dormant, and then Matt Caldwell walked into his life and the whole apparatus clicked back into place like it had never left. Matt Caldwell was the son of the town's most powerful man, and he wore that entitlement like armor. He was reckless in the most lethal possible way. He had killed people by deliberately ramming another boat, walked away from it, and experienced exactly zero consequences because his father's money and influence had made every problem disappear. When Dexter caught him killing a white deer on Seneca Sovereign territory, something shifted. Dexter knocked him unconscious, set up a proper kill room in his shed, and then executed him with the same cold precision he'd always had. The instinct hadn't gone anywhere. It had just been waiting for someone stupid enough to give it a reason. The problem with Matt was his father. Kurt Caldwell was the closest thing Iron Lake had to a patriarch, the man who kept the town running, who everyone respected or feared depending on their relationship with him. And Kurt was also, it turned out, a serial killer who had been abducting and murdering young women for years, preserving their bodies in a hidden underground bunker like trophies in a mausoleum. Now, he had the resources and the community standing to operate almost indefinitely. When Dexter started pulling at the threads, Kurt pulled back. The two of them circled each other across most of the season in a slow, escalating chess match that the show had clearly been building toward from the beginning. When it finally ended, Dexter stabbed him in the chest in that very bunker, surrounded by every victim Kurt had ever kept. Jasper Hodge was a drug dealer operating in Iron Lake's margins, small enough not to draw attention, dangerous enough to leave victims. Dexter orchestrated a fatal fentanyl overdose. Elric Kane was Kurt Caldwell's loyal truck driver and henchman sent specifically to kidnap Dexter. That didn't go the way Kurt planned. Dexter stabbed him. These New Blood kills had a different texture than anything from the original series. Dexter was older, the urgency felt different, there was less ritual, less architecture to the process, and underneath all of it was the quiet, unresolved thread of Harrison, Dexter's son, who had grown up in his father's absence and arrived in Iron Lake carrying his own version of the Dark Passenger without fully understanding what that meant. Which one of these kills do you think defined Dexter the most? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you haven't already, go check out our video on Dexter without his code, hit that like button, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.